Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card uses the Stampin' Up! Celebration set called What I Love. I'm just using the outline, so you can use any outline flower stamp you want. Because I'm using Stampin' Up! Inks, I'm going to use Stampin' Up! Cardstock. I've got my rich raspberry. It's a brand new ink pad to me. It's a very rich, deep, dark purple. So I'm going to ink up my outline stamp. And you can see this is a multi-step stamp set, so it's got arrows. That's how Stampin' Up! Shows you how to stamp them. And my arrow got covered with ink, but it's not going to stamp, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to kind of move it off to the side a little bit so I don't have it centered in my panel here. I'm going to stamp it on a Post-it and cut it out, and I'm going to use this as a mask for stamping the leaves. So I'm going to place my mask on top of what I've stamped, and this set comes with some leaves, so I'm going to use Garden Green. It's just another Stampin' Up! Ink. It's just a dark green. I want some vibrant colors because my background is going to be a really subtle gray. So I'm going to go around here and stamp all this Garden Green, and I'm going to deliberate a little bit. And this particular leaf stamp will allow you to stamp one leaf while you stamp on the mask with the other. So I'm going to do that a few times as well. I took it off and decided I needed a little bit more on that right hand side to balance it out. So I'm just going to stamp one more leaf. I'm actually going to be watercoloring this flower, and I know I'm not using watercolor paper, so it does make it a little bit challenging, but it can be done. I have to squeeze my ink pad to get some ink on the top, so I'll show you how to do this. Just press firmly in the middle of the ink pad, and then the ink will appear on the lid, and it's a perfect amount to just pick up with an Aqua Painter. The Aqua Painter I'm using is also by Stampin' Up! It's their small one in the 2-pack set. I'm going to zoom in so you can see. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the color and drop it into each petal one at a time. It dries so fast, so you really have to work quickly. I've got a tissue off to the side here to wipe off excess color. I'm going to drop the color at the base of the petal and then move it outward until it gets lighter or even white. I found that if you wet the petal first with water, and then drop the color in, it's a little bit easier, it spreads better. But if you pause and go back, you'll find that you won't be able to blend it anymore, as you can see. So that's why you have to work pretty quickly and try not to lift your brush off the paper until you're done. And that's why it can be challenging, because you might have a little bit too much color. You'll see on this petal I'll drop the color, and then once I go off the paper, it's stuck there. So, but you can always go back in and add a little bit more. You won't be able to blend the line, but you can add more color. And that's kind of why I picked this flower, because it's very sketchy and it's not really meant to be a realistic looking flower. It's meant to be more of a watercolor. Also notice that because it dries so quickly and absorbs into the paper, that my outline image isn't going anywhere. So even if I color the water over my outline image, it's not going to bleed or spread at all. You can see I'm dropping in the darkest color at the center of the petals, and I'm moving outward. And in some petals, I'm trying to leave even just a little bit of white at the edge. And I found that if I color a very, very light layer of color first and then go back in with a second layer of dark, that it was a little bit easier to blend. And I was kind of rushing between my tissue and the cardstock, and at some point I splattered some of the ink. I don't know if you can see it in the lower left hand corner, but I'm going to go ahead and try to clean that up. I actually do this all the time, but I thought that this was actually a pretty thick layer of ink, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get it off. So I'm actually going to show you this in real time. It takes about 1.5 minutes to fix, but I do end up fixing it. I'm using my sanding block. I highly recommend that you get one of these because it really, really does work. You can see the little dust of the paper coming off the paper, and the tip, and this is the greatest tip that I can give you, is to not work on a very small area. So you'll notice that I'm moving my sanding block pretty high up across to the side of the flower and then around the bottom of the flower, because if you work on your cardstock in one central little area, it's going to go through too many layers and it's going to start to peel off. So as long as you're doing a very light-handed brush of your sanding block across wide area of the paper, you should get a nice even sort of sloping down towards your ink spot, but you won't be able to see it. I mean, it's not like it's visible. So I'm just feeling it now, and it's still pretty smooth, and the ink is mostly off. It's not noticeable anymore, and so I think it did a pretty good job of taking off the ink. It's not perfect, but it definitely will work. So anyway, next I'm moving on to the leaves. I'm going to use the same technique. I'm going to cover it with water first, and then I'm going to color it in with my garden green. I squeeze the ink pad so that I could get the ink on the lid. I'm going to speed through the rest of this coloring and give you a couple of tips on using watercolor on regular cardstock. The first is be conservative with your water. If you use too much water, you're going to start to see the cardstock bubble up and peel off. Another tip is to not brush too much. You're going to see that same peeling up of the paper if you use too much brushing on the cardstock. So just kind of a couple of swipes should do. Now you can see I'm going in with another layer of green just to add a little bit of shadow behind this flower. It just gives a little bit more dimension to the card. I'm also drawing my Aqua Painter out with a few lines just to add some of those leaf veins. So really all you need is just one color, and you can get a lot of variation with just one color. For my background, I'm using Smoky Slate. It's just kind of a light bluish gray, and I'm going to take that same outline stamp and I'm going to ink it up with the Smoky Slate. I'm going to stamp off, and then I'm going to stamp around the flower. So I'm going to kind of strategically place them so that they're going around the central flower, and they can be on top of the leaves. And actually in one case I actually stamped it on a little bit on the flower. You're not really going to notice it because it's colored so brightly, and this is a very, very subtle color in the background. But I'm just going to cover everything all the way out to the edge and make sure that I stamp off each and every time. You may get stuck with a couple of areas that you have to overlap the flower itself, and that is totally fine because it's just lines in the background and you really won't even notice it. So here is the final result. Now this panel is 3.5 inches tall. I'm going to mat this with a 1/16 of an inch black at the top and the bottom, and I'm using my Misty to line it up on the left edge to make sure everything is straight. And then I'm going to add my sentiment just to the lower right of the flower. Again, with the Misty, I've got VersaFine black onyx ink. And then I'm going to mat this piece to a piece of Smoky Slate cardstock. I like how Stampin' Up! Has matching cardstock with inks, and their cardstock is really nice, good quality. So I'm going to center that in the middle of my panel, and after I did this I thought, you know, I think it would be kind of nice to have a white edge at the top and the bottom as well. So I kind of looked at it on my base to see what it would look like and decided to go with it. So I trimmed off 1/4 of an inch at the top and 1/4 of an inch at the bottom, and then I'm centering my panel on the card base, which is just 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch folded Nina Solar White. This sentiment has 2 parts to it, so just for something a little bit different, I'm going to stamp off my Smoky Slate just like I did with the background on the front, and I'm going to stamp a flower in the middle of the inside, and then I'll take the second part of my sentiment, stamp it up with some VersaFine black onyx ink, and stamp it right there in the center. And that is the card for today. So a pretty quick and simple, easy watercolor with just a small area. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.